podcast. I'm Jennifer Spivey, and I've got my good friend Lindsey Croston with me today. Thank you, Lindsey. So y'all are used to seeing me film in my kitchen, so we're just snuggling in like we usually do. So thanks for coming over today. So Lindsey is one of my favorites. We've been good friends for a long time.
A couple of years.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
And so we meet regularly for lunch and partner up on some ministry stuff. And so I thought it'd be fun to have her here. Lindsey, you've been bivocational in ministry a little more than 20 years, since the early 2000s. Yep. You have master's degree?
Two
master's degrees in what?
So I have a master's degree in theological studies and a master's degree in biblical studies.
And oddly, that's what we're going to talk about.
It is what we're going to talk about.
Okay. You're also working on your doctorate.
Yep, and New Testament studies.
So what I know about you is you're obviously an expert, but you just love the Word of God.
I do, yeah.
And so if y'all have listened to me before, you know I'm just plain vanilla. And what I want is to bring the Word of God to you in a way that makes it relatable and accessible. And so Lindsey has all of this background knowledge, and you have all of these degrees, and you've studied the Word so much. You've got a lot more context than I have. And yet, you're still able to bring the Word to us in a way that makes it practical, relatable, accessible for right now, which I think is really important. And so I just think that you really love to encourage people to love the Word of God.
Yeah, I do.
I brought you into my church a couple of years ago to teach a small group of mine through the book of Philippians, and it was so good. It
was a lot of fun.
So a lot of fun. So I just thought that we'd have fun being on the podcast together. So we just kind of want to get into some nuts and bolts of what is theology, what is biblical studies.
Yeah.
We'll start there.
Yeah, okay, so theology comes from it comes from two Greek words. So the first part of it is theos, and the second part is logos.
I know one of these.
Yeah, I know you do. And so theos is the Greek word for God, and logos is the Greek word for words.
Yes,
okay?
I got that one.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Right. So when we talk about theology, it means words about God.
Okay.
And so it's literally talking about God. So anytime you talk about God, you're doing theology.
Here I am.
What?
Doing it. All right. I'm a theologian, and I didn't even know it. You can take the credit for that or the blame for that, however this turns out.
We'll see how it goes.
Well, it remains to be seen.
So that leads me to, it's one of my favorite quotes by C.S. Lewis.
Love C.S. Lewis.
I love him. He's fabulous. He says, everyone reads, everyone hears things discussed.
Okay.
Consequently, if you do not listen to theology, that will not mean that you have no ideas about God. It will mean that you have a lot of wrong ones. Bad, muddled, out-of-date ideas.
Wow.
And so that is one thing that we tend to kind of rely on word of mouth a lot of times when we rely on theology.
Yes.
Instead of digging in and doing the hard work ourselves.
Right.
And so being responsible disciples means that we have to kind of work out theology and the way that we talk about God.
Yeah.
And understand how do we talk about God faithfully. And so that is what studying theology means. So when I taught, I was a professor for 8 years at a Christian university, and one of the main courses that I taught was Old Testament survey and New Testament survey, and I had a lot of college freshmen in those classes. Every once in a while I get a senior who had put off those classes until the end.
That was a mistake.
It was
on
a
their
mistake.
part.
It really was, especially if they had me as a professor, because I was not an easy gen ed. And so, they're seniors with an 8-week summer vacation.
Okay.
They don't know a whole lot.
Right.
They're learning how to microwave mac and cheese in their microwaves because mama's not there to do it anymore.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so they're coming in, and it's a required course for them. Most of them are not.
Just really great timing, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but maybe on a future episode we can talk about that it's really important just to grab them right there in the beginning. And so just because they're in a Christian college, it doesn't follow that they're going to stay committed to church.
Or even that they're Christians.
Yeah, and we're losing a lot. 18, 19, 20 years old, this is when a lot of them are leaving the church. Yeah. So it's really a great idea to grab them right then. And I've heard you teach, so I imagine those classes were fun.
I enjoyed teaching them.
Of course.
Some of my students slept through them, but they were college students.
There you go.
It comes part for the course.
Yes.
So, but one of the things that I told my students, because so many of them were not religion majors, was that they were the only person that many people in their workplace would encounter who were Christians.
Sure.
And so the way that they spoke about God and the way they reflected God was really important. And so it was their responsibility as believers to learn how to read the Bible well, to learn how to talk about God well, so that they could be Jesus authentically to those people that they came in contact with who might never darken the door of a church. They would never hear a preacher preach. And so the only way they would maybe have a chance at hearing the gospel was through those students who were sitting in those seats.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why. Because, you know, if you've got a church of, say, 150 people, which is, I think, about the average size of most churches in the U.S., maybe a little less, actually. Yeah. You've got one, maybe two pastors at that size church.
Yeah.
Well, then you've got 148 people who are going out to the workforce or out to Publix or, you know, to the library for story time.
Yes.
And those are the people who are the hands and feet of the gospel.
And they need to have
words about God.
Okay.
So that's why.
That's what theology is. And a little bit about why it's important. I want to revisit why.
Well, yeah.
What about biblical studies?
Okay, so biblical studies is our source for theology. So the Bible... Are you ready? I'm going to have some people clutching their pearls.
Okay. Let's prepare.
So
brace. Get your brace.
You've heard the phrase, the Bible is God's love letter to us.
I have heard that, and I know what you're going to say. Stay with us for a minute.
Stay with us. Hold on.
All right.
I promise it's not heresy.
Yes. It's going to feel like it.
It's going to feel like it for just a minute. So I don't like that phrase.
Yeah.
Because the Bible was not written to us. Okay? Right. Now, hold on. Hold on to your pearls.
Sure.
Okay? The Bible was written to a very specific audience at a very specific time in a very specific place. It's kind of like your great-great-great-grandpa writing your great-great-great, did I get the greats right?
Yes.
Grandma love letters.
Yeah.
And you inherit those when somebody passes away and, you know, you get a house and an attic full of all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And you find those love letters and they're yours because you've inherited them. But they weren't written to you.
Right.
Okay?
Not even about you.
Not even about you. Right. Yeah, not about
directly.
You. Yeah. I mean, but you're part of that line.
Yeah.
You're part of that family, okay? Mm-hmm. The Bible is like that. We're part of the family of God. And the Bible is God's revelation of who God is to God's people.
Yes.
And so because we are God's people, the Bible is for us. But it's not to us.
And it's a benefit to us to know where we came from. And again, knowing the context is going to turn out to be really important. And so I don't want to get off on a tangent, but like we have verses like, let the women keep silent in the church. We need some context because that wasn't written about you.
No.
Specifically. It was written to a specific church at a specific time for a specific group of women.
Right. And biblical studies not only gives us the historical context and the cultural context, it also gives us the language context.
Okay.
Because the language in that verse, like 2 verses earlier where it tells the men to pray quietly, that Greek word for quietly is the exact same word that Paul uses that gets translated silent for the women.
Just different for the girls and the boys. A little double standard there.
When we translate into English, it gets a little wonky sometimes.
Right. All right. We'll save that
that's
for another
we'll
podcast. Right. So who can study theology? Who can study the Bible?
I mean, like the short answer is everybody, right?
Yeah,
everybody can do it. And that sounds kind of like, oh, well, everybody can do theology.
Yeah.
And you know, somebody's sitting at home going, well, I can't study theology.
Right. I don't have 2 master's
degrees. I can't study theology. Okay, listen, y'all. I am from Appalachia. Okay. And I'm just a mountain girl at heart.
Yeah.
And I love studying theology, not just because I'm a Bible nerd.
Sure.
Because I am a Bible nerd. But because it helps me to know God better.
Yes.
And you don't have to go out and become an expert about the Bible. You don't have to go take Greek or Hebrew. You don't have to learn Martin Luther's 95 Theses or like memorize all the popes in order. Like you don't have to do all of that to study theology.
Yeah.
What you have to do is when you have a question about something, dig into it. You know, read the notes in your study Bible. Or maybe if you don't have a study Bible, get a study Bible.
Yeah.
Get a good study Bible, not just like an application study Bible, but like a background study Bible. You know, study the Bible in community. The Bible is a communal document. It's meant to be studied with others.
Yes.
We're so bad about, in Western culture, making the Bible all about me. In fact, like one of my pet peeves is the first question we ask when we sit down to read the Bible is, what does this verse mean for me?
Right.
That's the worst question you can ask, because that's like not what it's about at all.
Yeah.
It's about who is God.
Yeah.
You know?
And there is a private aspect to your
There
devotion.
is, but it should be the last question you ask, not the first
for
one.
Sure.
That's
for
a whole
sure.
other podcast
Yes,
episode.
Exactly. So make a list of how many of these we've got to do. So we went over what is theology, what is biblical studies, who can be involved in this. I'd like to put a pause here, and then perhaps you'll come back. Let's talk about why, when, where, how.
Yeah.
A few more nuts and bolts so we can really understand in a practical sense, what is theology, why do we need to be involved, what are biblical studies, why do we need to be involved in that. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us on the Connect podcast, and we'll see you next Thursday with Lindsey.
Yep.
And I'll see you again really soon.